I'm so glad I didn't grow up in America where I had to grow up with a mask on. What are the implications of this?
Well, aside from the fact that they're absolutely useless and that kids won't abide by putting them on, which sort of renders the whole point moot, they are actually psychologically damaging. They instill and reinforce fear. I keep getting back to this point about fear because I think it's really the crux of this entire issue right now. Without managing the fear, we cannot move forward. I see dozens of children every week, about a quarter of whom don't wear masks. Parents appropriately dissuade them from using them. About half of the kids are sort of on and off the mask, and about a quarter are on the mask all the time. What I've noticed is that in families that insist that their children wear masks or that limit their children's activities to activities that require masks, which is actually quite common now in Los Angeles. Kids are not allowed to play with one another, they're not allowed to bike, they're not allowed to go to the park. A private park in my neighborhood where I live was just closed 4 days ago because the homeowners association noticed that there were, this is their bulletin by the way that I'm quoting, too many children not wearing masks in the park, and that the grass might become contaminated, and that because children like to touch the grass and roll in it, they could become infected and then kill their grandparents that they're living with. So they sprayed toxic chemicals on the grass in order to disinfect the grass. And it's now going to be closed for 30 days with the option of renewing on a 30-day rolling basis, sort of like the lockdown. What happens to kids when they live in that kind of environment? What they learn is that everything is scary, everything is dangerous, they are dangerous, their friends are dangerous, the grass is dangerous, they could kill grandfather. As of right now, the number is, wait for it, 0. There is not a single documented case of transmission from a child to an adult in any of the school systems. There's no death of a child in the state of California under the age of 18 from coronavirus that's documented by the CDC, which we know exaggerates numbers, but you can't exaggerate 0. Multiply it by any number, it doesn't go up. So my concern as a child psychiatrist is seeing this. I am seeing a generation of children who are learning by mask wearing, mask enforcement, mask police, and mask shaming, because it happens, we've all seen it. We all saw it here the first day when we walked around the Capitol steps and the Supreme Court steps. People walk up to you about 2 feet away and tell you that they're contaminating each other, you and them, because they're not wearing a mask. Why they wouldn't stay more than 6 feet apart is beyond me. But what they're being taught, the children, is that everything is scary and fearful and dangerous. So what happens is the children stay at home. They don't go out. I'm putting aside all of the health problems like immunologic issues, rashes, heart disease, obesity, etc. Putting that to the side for a moment. Their emotional development becomes stunted. They become scared and phobic. They're unable to then associate with people outside the home, to engage in conversation, to date, to marry. I'm going down the line here, 10, 20, 30 years down the line. We're going to have an entire generation of youngsters who are going to become adults, who are going to become afraid to live outside of the basement. That is, I'm not exaggerating this, I don't think. And often they're comfortable with it. And comfort is a very, very bad thing to be living in for a long time when you're not challenged. We know it with adults who are being paid extra money to stay home and not work. They don't want to go back to work because it's more comfortable. When kids become too comfortable in an environment that's not healthy, they stay comfortable and they stay sick and they don't grow and they don't develop. And to have a whole 10, 20 years worth of kids not actually becoming part of our country and achieving their potential is not just an error. It is not an error. It was an error to close the schools. This is negligence. This is abuse.
It's diabolical. So, Doctor, can you talk about some of the external costs of the shutdowns? Because there are calls to shut down America again. They might shut down other states, including Florida, very soon.
I think the smartest thing you can do is look at a nation that shut down, a nation that didn't shut down, how'd it go?
Well, so just so you know, the zeitgeist of America is that Sweden is an unbelievable disaster.
Which is not true.
Tell us why.
5,600 deaths and 10.2 million people. When you ask Anders Tegnell, chief epidemiologist, how are you doing? How are things going? He said, well, we're content with our results. Please extrapolate, they ask him. He says, well, Our nursing homes weren't protected well. They're very large compared to our Nordic neighbor. They're very large. They had some hygiene issues. They had rampant 50 to 60% death rate came from those in the elderly centers. So if you decrease that, it's down to 2,500. And then Norway, which is right next door, is 5 million, half the size. They had much less death rate, but they also have less immunity. So 1 to 2% immunity versus about 20% immunity. So guess what happens during cold and flu when this starts up again? And you have a nation that has immunity and a nation that has no immunity. You don't have to be a scientist to know one nation is better prepared than the other. Also, they didn't have a free-falling economy. There's a public health, there's medical problems that arise when you shut down. People say it's just financial. Au contraire, I have to say to that. Let's talk about the 600% increase in suicide reportings. Let's talk about the spousal abuse. Let's talk about alcoholism. I have firsthand cases of suicide in my area. I have firsthand cases of people who are going into a bad depression. These are not just me. I've talked to ER physicians around the country that said public health crisis secondary to financial lockdown. This is not financial, this is medical. So you can't just say that it's a financial issue. And when I look at Norway and I say kids are in school, restaurants are open, economy is not in free fall, I think that is a sustainable model. When you ask Anders Tegnell, how are you guys doing? He goes, we're in a sustainable model. He goes, the U.S. pulled it back down to an unsustainable, impractical model that you can't do. We can do this for years. Can you?
And they want to shut down America again, which again, it seems a common theme here, if I were to kind of summarize, is that we've been deceived and we are continually being deceived. There seems to be a broader totalitarian agenda at play, and that there is a solution that actually no one wants to talk about, right?
I think one thing that, the overall problem to this approach is we are, it's a strategy problem where we're locking down everyone. We want masks on everyone, and we're kind of forgetting that the fatality rate in children that go to schools, in people under 45, people under 60, is extremely low. This is not a universal strategy for everyone. There's no reason to destroy the youth's lives, to destroy the economy, to destroy businesses when this affects a small percentage of the population. That should be the focus, we made that mistake back in March with nursing homes. We didn't focus on the most vulnerable people. And that's, I think, what we're still doing is we're not focusing on the most vulnerable people. We're worried about the 22-year-old who's walking down the street without a mask on. That's who we're yelling at right now. Okay? And so this is a misdirection on appropriate resources and energy to focus on those older patients, those people that maybe should be on hydroxychloroquine, the ones that maybe should have guidance, the right guidance that's different from someone who is younger. And there's a total messaging problem, I think, on that front.
So doctor, and then doctor.
Could we return to masks for just a moment?
Yeah, please.
So I have 2 points I wanted to bring up. People often ask me as a physician, what do you think about masks, and should kids wear masks to school and things like that? And so, there's so much messaging everywhere you go. I mean, you're at the market and they're talking about masks on TV. You can't turn on YouTube now. It's all PSAs on that. And so, having been in a field where we wear masks a lot, and even if we're not surgeons, we've spent a lot of time in the OR, you develop mask hygiene. And that is really missing as part of the conversation. I'll get to the fact that they're not effective also. But so to go back to are they effective or not, they have done studies with SARS-CoV-2 to look at viral transmission through that mask, whether it's a surgical mask, whether it's a cloth mask. And in those with people who are infected and cough or sneeze into those masks, they can detect virus on the inside of the mask and the outside. So when you go to the grocery store and people are wearing their masks in case they have COVID and they cough on their mask, then they touch their mask 200 times in the market, adjusting the nose. They touch the mayonnaise, you touch the mayonnaise, pick it up, and touch your mask. I mean, that's more of a contamination than if we were walking around with no masks, because people are touching their faces so much, and they don't realize when you touch your mask.
That's such a good point.
I tell my kids, it's like you're picking everybody's nose in the market. That's how gross it is when you touch your mask.
So you're actually making the argument the mask could be doing more harm. Could be.
Right, because you're touching it so... people touch the masks more than they would touch their face, although they still touch their face too much. So that's point one about the masks. The other thing, when you even look at the World Health Organization, I am a person who, if I have a mandate that affects my life or law that affects my life, I read it. And so, when we had our mask mandate in California by the California Department of Health, the first thing I did was look at it and read it. And that was important to me because I'm hearing impaired. And there is an exception for hearing impaired individuals. The appropriate thing for me to wear is a shield. When you're talking to me, you're actually exempt from wearing a mask because I do rely on your lips as communication. And so it would be appropriate for you to wear nothing or a shield if possible. Yeah. When you look at the WHO, they go through physicians and they say for healthcare workers, the appropriate thing to wear would be a medical mask or a shield. And they specifically say cloth masks are not appropriate for healthcare workers. And so I think an interesting thing in terms of mask shaming and being uncomfortable about seeing faces now is this is what I wear. And actually I have my staff wear these because I need to see their faces. It really is difficult for me without that. And so to see, I've had difficulty getting on planes several times recently where people say, oh, you have to wear a mask also. When actually this is more effective in germ and spill transmission. And it's just that fear that I don't know if it's fear I'm not conforming, but I actually have to carry the statute with me in my hearing test to document that I'm hearing impaired. And so it's really odd to me because it's so uninformed. And also, most of the states when they have a mask mandate, they'll specifically exclude outdoors greater than 6 feet. You don't need to wear it for casual contact. There's been not a single case of outdoor transmission with casual contact like that. And yet, somebody standing 30 feet away will walk up to you to tell you you're not wearing a mask outside and come in that zone when they're not reading even the rules that apply to their life. And so I feel so like people are so scared of me wearing a shield, which is safer. And so it does call into that. Like, what is this about? Are you that scared of seeing me smile at you now? Are you that upset that I'm not like everybody else? I'm not conforming? I mean, this is actually safer if that's where we're going. Well, and I'm impaired. So you're infringing on my ADA rights.
Yeah, precisely. That's a great point. And part of this is that we have to realize how programmable our society actually is. And we convinced ourselves as a country we really believe in liberty. And I think that's a bunch of nonsense, actually. I think that we are far less likely to fight for our freedoms. I think people are standing up. You guys are, and I go to South Dakota, and I feel like I'm still in my country. But I can't. I was just in New York. I cannot walk 3 feet without the masked Gestapo to come through. Doctor, you had a comment?
I would go back to the depression issue.
Please, can you talk about that, please?
Sure. Depression is worsened by a lack of vitamin D, a lack of zinc. Many articles about this problem. We need to make sure that our children are getting enough vitamin D. Our children are getting enough zinc. They're not in school. They're not getting their milk. Our milk supply is actually being dumped into manure pits right now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Did you want to say something, Dr. Gold?
No,
Okay.
Yeah, I'll reply a little bit about what Dr. Tardaro said about schools and about children. And I think it's really clear. I think it's good for the audience to know that influenza kills a lot more kids than COVID. So I think that's good to hear that. That's the reality. So up until about age 45, there's where you start to see a little transition. Between 45 to 70, it's about even with the flu. Over 70, clearly COVID has been more deadly. So I think as we move forward and think about this as we go forward, if we can, I think the elephant in the room is hydroxychloroquine. We don't talk about that. That needs to be brought to the forefront. And then those statistics that I just mentioned. That's why we should open schools.
Well, so doctors, I should say, in the couple minutes we have remaining, there's one topic here. We talked about masks, talked about lockdowns, talked about social isolation, but there's this incredible fixation on finding a vaccine. Does anyone want to take it?
Yeah, I want to get one comment, and then I'll let you go. The vaccine, we don't have very good RNA vaccines, period. So to say we're going to coronaviruses, we've never had a vaccine for a coronavirus, ever. We have a flu vaccine. It's not very good. It's like a dog chasing his tail. Okay, so to expect a vaccine to come out and be effective very brief in a brief period of time is really unrealistic. If it happens, it'd be wonderful. Okay, but the likelihood of getting a vaccine